The last thing I expected to find when I opened the door to my garage was Kimberly sitting in the driver's seat of her brand new BMW. Mascara streaking her face, gripping the steering wheel like she was ready to drive straight into a wall. Her phone was in her lap, the screen still lit up with a number I didn't recognize. "Kim?" I asked, stepping inside cautiously. The acrid smell of cigarette smoke, something she claimed to quit years ago, lingered in the air. She didn't even look up. Her knuckles were bone white against the wheel. "What the hell is going on?" She flinched, quickly locking her phone and shoving it into her bag. "Nothing. I just needed a moment alone." Her voice cracked, and it might have sounded genuine if her whole vibe didn't scream guilt. My eyes fell to the open glove compartment, where a stack of papers spilled out onto the passenger seat. Kimberly noticed too late. When I reached for them, she lunged forward, trying to block me, but I was faster. The first paper in my hand stopped me cold. A withdrawal slip for $5,000 from our joint savings account. My stomach churned as I flipped through more. Receipts for luxury dinners, boutique shopping sprees, a weekend at a five-star hotel I definitely wasn't invited to. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice low, deadly calm. I'd learned that tone in the hospital. Panic solves nothing, but calm can cut through bone. Kimberly's lips quivered for a split second before she put on the performance I now realized she'd been perfecting for years. I can explain," she stammered, her eyes glassy with crocodile tears. "I was going to surprise you." Just don't," I snapped. "Don't even try to lie to me right now." My heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear her over the rush of blood in my ears. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of this. Not this time. Her face hardened in an instant, the mask of innocence cracking to reveal something far uglier. "You want the truth? Fine. You're always so busy at work, Robert. Someone had to handle things around here. I've been under so much pressure, and you don't even notice. All you care about is paying bills and saving money like some goddamn accountant. Do you even know what it's like to feel alive anymore?" I stared at her, stunned. "Alive?" I echoed. "You spent our money. Money we've been saving for years. On what exactly? Dinner? Designer clothes? A weekend at a hotel? Who were you with, Kim? Who the hell were you with?" The slap came out of nowhere, sharp and stinging across my cheek. For a moment we were both frozen, her hands still mid-air, her face twisted in shock. Maybe at herself, maybe at me for not flinching. "You don't get to question me," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you're some hero because you work long hours and pay the bills? I gave up everything for this life. For you." The laugh that bubbled out of me was bitter and involuntary. "For me? Kimberly, you've been draining me dry, emotionally and financially, for years, and I was too stupid to see it. But this is something else." I threw the papers onto the passenger seat and walked out of the garage, slamming the door behind me. My hands were trembling, and I felt like I'd been hit by a freight train. But as I stood there in the kitchen, staring blankly at the marble countertop I'd worked overtime to afford, a cold clarity settled over me. This wasn't just about a few lies or a little spending spree. This was bigger. And if Kimberly thought she could outsmart me, she was in for a rude awakening. I didn't sleep that night, while Kimberly stayed locked in the guest bedroom, claiming she needed space to calm down. I sat in the living room piecing together every lie, every inconsistency, and every red flag I'd ignored over the years. The stack of receipts sat on the coffee table like a smoking gun. My hands itched to confront her again, but I knew it wouldn't accomplish anything. Not yet. Kimberly was too good at deflecting, too good at twisting things to make herself the victim. If I wanted answers, real answers, I needed to approach this strategically. The first crack in her armor came sooner than I expected. Early the next morning, while she was still upstairs, I opened her laptop. Kimberly was always meticulous about clearing her browser history. Another detail I'd shrugged off in the past. But this time, she'd slipped up. A tab was still open to her email. My stomach dropped as I scanned the inbox. Messages from luxury spas, personal shoppers, and five-star hotels were nothing new. Kimberly loved to live like we were millionaires. But one name stood out. Ben Hamilton. The subject line read, "Last weekend, can't stop thinking about you." My hand hesitated over the trackpad for a moment, my chest tightening, before I clicked. The email hit me like a punch to the gut. Kim, I haven't been able to stop replaying our weekend in my head. The way you looked in that red dress. I'm counting down the days until I can see you again. Let me know if your husband is working late this week. I'll book the suite. Yours, Ben. I felt my teeth grind together so hard it hurt. Ben, her ex-boyfriend. The same guy she used to describe as immature and a toxic mess. The same guy she swore was out of her life for good. I didn't even hear her come downstairs. What are you doing on my laptop? Kimberly's voice sliced through the air, sharp and accusing. She was still in her robe, coffee cup in hand. Her face perfectly composed as if she hadn't spent the night hiding from me. I didn't bother closing the screen. Ben Hamilton, I said flatly, watching her reaction. For a split second, her mask slipped, her eyes widened, and her breath hitched. But she recovered quickly, her lips curling into a sneer. You went through my email? She shot back, ignoring the question entirely. Do you have any idea how invasive that is? What's wrong with you, Robert? What's wrong with me? I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You've been sneaking around with your ex, using our money to fund your little weekends together, and you want to talk about me invading your privacy? Her face turned crimson, but not from shame. Kimberly didn't do shame. Oh, please, she scoffed. Ben's just a friend. You're reading way too much into this. Honestly, this is exactly why I didn't tell you. We both know how insecure you can be. The audacity of her gaslighting almost made me laugh. Insecure, I repeated, my voice cold. Kim, I just read an email where he's reminiscing about your red dress and booking a suite while I'm working 12-hour shifts to pay for your goddamn lifestyle. Do you really think I'm that stupid? Her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms defensively. You don't understand. I've been miserable, Robert. Miserable. You're never around. You bury yourself in work and expect me to sit here and wait for you like some Stepford wife. Ben, he listens to me. He makes me feel appreciated. Something you haven't done in years. The shift in tone was so calculated, so manipulative, that it made my skin crawl. So, this is my fault now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You cheat on me? Lie to me? Drain our savings? And I'm the bad guy because I was too busy working to fund your designer bags and secret weekends? You act like I haven't sacrificed anything. She snapped, stepping closer, her finger jabbing the air between us. I gave up my career for this marriage. It could have been so much more, but I chose you. And what did I get in return? A husband who treats me like a bill he has to pay. For a moment I was speechless, not because her words hurt, but because of how little remorse she felt. Kimberly didn't see this as betrayal. She saw it as entitlement. She genuinely believed she deserved to do whatever she wanted, no matter the cost. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply stared at her, letting the weight of her words settle over me like a storm cloud. You're unbelievable, I said quietly, shaking my head. I hope he's worth it, Kim, because whatever this is, you just killed it. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door before she could respond. What she didn't know was that I wasn't leaving to cool off. I had a plan, and the first step was setting it in motion. I drove to the one place I knew I could think clearly, my brother Matt's house. Matt was the complete opposite of Kimberly. Straightforward, loyal, and the kind of guy who wouldn't sugarcoat a damn thing. When I showed up unannounced at 7 in the morning, he opened the door in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. Rob, what the hell are you doing here this early? You look like you've been hit by a truck. I walked past him without a word and collapsed onto his couch. My hands were still shaking, my head spinning from the confrontation with Kimberly. Matt shut the door, grabbed 2 mugs of coffee, and sat across from me. All right, spill, he said. What's going on? I told him everything. The receipts, the email, the way Kimberly had tried to flip the whole thing on me like I was the villain. By the time I was done, Matt looked like he was ready to punch a hole in the wall. She's been cheating on you with Ben Hamilton? That guy's a snake, Rob. Everyone knows it. I can't believe you didn't see this coming. Thanks for the support, I said dryly, running a hand through my hair. But I'm not here to cry about it. I'm here to figure out what to do next. Matt leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. All right, you want my advice? Obviously. Burn her life down. I raised an eyebrow. Subtle. I'm serious, Rob. She's been screwing you over for years. Financially, emotionally. And now this. You've got to stop playing the nice guy. Hit her where it hurts. I took a long sip of coffee, letting his words sink in. Matt wasn't wrong. Kimberly had been taking advantage of me for as long as I could remember, and I'd let her. But this wasn't just a betrayal. This was war. I'm not going to burn her life down, I said finally. But I am going to make sure she can't screw me over anymore. Good. So, what's the plan? I smirked, a small spark of determination lighting up inside me. First, I'm calling the bank. By the time I got back to the house that afternoon, I'd already put the wheels in motion. Kimberly wasn't home, which gave me the perfect opportunity to start dismantling her web of lies. I went straight to the home office and opened the filing cabinet where she kept all her financial records. Sure enough, there were more surprises waiting for me. A second credit card I didn't know about, maxed out to the tune of $20,000. Fake invoices for business expenses that she'd clearly been pocketing, and a document titled Asset Transfer Plan that mentioned offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. Kimberly had no idea I was on to her yet, and I wasn't going to tip her off. Instead, I made copies of everything, stuffing the originals back into the drawer like I hadn't touched them. My next stop was the car dealership. I still had the paperwork for the BMW in my name, and after a brief chat with the manager, I arranged to have the car repossessed. Kimberly loved that car more than anything. It was her trophy, her proof to the world that she was living a luxurious life. Taking it away from her wasn't just about money. It was about sending a message. By the time Kimberly got home that evening, I was already 2 steps ahead. She walked in the door like nothing had happened, flashing me a fake smile that made my stomach turn. "Hey," she said casually, tossing her bag onto the counter. "Where have you been all day?" "Out," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I wasn't ready to let her know just how much I'd uncovered. Not yet. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine and started scrolling through her phone like everything was fine. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at me out of the corner of her eye. She knew something was off, but she didn't know what. Good. Let her sweat. The first domino would fall the next morning, and I couldn't wait to watch the show. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Kimberly hadn't come downstairs yet, probably assuming I was still sulking after our argument. She always did this, waited for me to cave, apologize, and sweep everything under the rug. But today, she'd wake up to a rude surprise. I was sitting in the kitchen with my coffee when I heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clicking on the floor. Kimberly strolled in, dressed to the nines as usual, her makeup flawless, her designer handbag swinging by her side. She gave me a quick, tight-lipped smile, clearly still testing the waters. "Good morning," she said brightly, her voice dripping with faux cheerfulness. "I have a showing downtown in an hour. Shouldn't you be heading to work?" I didn't respond, just took a slow sip of my coffee and watched her head toward the garage. The moment she opened the door, her sharp gasp echoed through the house. "Where's my car?" she yelled, her tone shifting from confusion to fury in a matter of seconds. "Robert, where the hell is my car?" I stood up calmly and walked over to the doorway, leaning against the frame as I watched her spin in circles like a panicked animal. "Oh, you mean the car I bought? The one that's registered in my name? Has been repossessed. I figured you didn't need it since you have Ben to drive you around." Her face turned ghost white, then bright red, and for a moment, she looked like she might explode. "You had no right to do that," she screamed, stomping her foot like a spoiled child. "That car was mine. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I have clients to meet today, Robert." I shrugged. "Then maybe Ben can lend you his car. Or better yet, why don't you take the bus? It might be a humbling experience." She stormed back into the kitchen, slamming her purse onto the counter. "You're being petty and childish," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can control me by taking away the car? You're pathetic." "Pathetic," I repeated, my voice eerily calm. "Kimberly, what's pathetic is lying to your husband, draining his bank account, and sneaking off to 5-star hotels with your ex-boyfriend. I'm not controlling you. I'm just cutting you off. If you want to live like a queen, You can do it on your own dime from now on. Her jaw dropped, and for the first time, she was at a loss for words. But it didn't last long. Kimberly was too proud, too manipulative to let me get the upper hand for long. You don't know what you're talking about, she spat. You've been working so much, you've completely lost touch with reality. I had to handle things because you weren't around to take care of me. Handle things? I laughed bitterly, pulling out the stack of financial documents I'd copied from her office. I slammed them onto the counter, the sound echoing through the kitchen. Is this what you call handling things? $20,000 on a secret credit card? Offshore accounts? Fake invoices? You've been planning to drain me dry, Kim. Don't you dare act like this was about survival. Her eyes darted to the papers, and I could see the panic flash across her face. She knew she was caught, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. I only did what I had to do, she said, her voice rising. Do you know how hard it's been for me? Watching all my friends live their best lives while I'm stuck here playing housewife to a husband who doesn't even appreciate me? You think I wanted to do this? You pushed me to it. Her words were like gasoline on a fire. I stepped closer, leaning in until we were inches apart. You don't get to play the victim here, Kimberly. You've been scheming behind my back for years, and now you're mad because I finally figured it out? Spare me your excuses. You've done nothing but take, and take, and take. And now it's over. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. Oh, and just so you know, I've frozen every joint account. You can't touch another dime of my money. So go ahead, call Ben, cry to your friends, do whatever you want. But from now on, you're on your own. The silence that followed was deafening. Kimberly stared at me, her eyes blazing with a mix of rage and disbelief. But she didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I just pulled the rug out from under her. And for once, she didn't have a plan to claw her way back. I walked out of the kitchen without looking back. But as I climbed into my car and drove away, a small part of me knew this wasn't over. Kimberly wasn't the type to go down quietly. And if I knew her at all, the real storm was just beginning. By the time I reached my office at the hospital, my phone was already buzzing nonstop. Kimberly was calling, texting, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between fury and desperation. You can't just freeze our accounts, Robert. That's illegal. You're overreacting. We can work this out like adults. Do you really want to embarrass both of us like this? You're ruining my reputation. You're not the man I married. I can't believe you'd betray me like this. Betray her? That one almost made me laugh out loud. The sheer audacity was enough to keep me from feeling any sympathy. Still, I silenced my phone and focused on work. Kimberly could spin her wheels all she wanted, but I wasn't about to engage. Not yet. That evening, as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange. The lights were on in the living room, but the curtains were drawn. Something Kimberly never did. She liked showing off our perfect home to the neighbors. My gut told me something was off, so I parked across the street instead of pulling into the garage. Peering through the side window, I saw Kimberly pacing back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear. Her face was red, her gestures frantic, like she was trying to talk someone into doing something they didn't want to do. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could read the tension in her body language. Whatever she was planning, it wasn't good. I slipped quietly into the house through the back door, careful not to alert her. She didn't notice me as I stood in the hallway, just out of sight, listening. Ben, you don't understand, she hissed, her voice low and sharp. If he files for divorce, I'm screwed. He's already frozen the accounts, and I can't access anything. I need you to come through for me. Do you still have that lawyer friend of yours? The one who handled your custody case? Yes, I'll pay, just get him to call me. I don't care how much it costs. Her tone shifted, softening in that fake, sugary way she used when she wanted something. Ben, baby, please. You're the only one I can trust right now. Robert's gone crazy. He's trying to ruin me, and I don't know what to do. You're the only one who's ever had my back. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. She wasn't just panicking. She was rallying her troops, trying to spin the narrative in her favor. But the real kicker came next. I'll figure it out, she said, pacing faster. If I have to sell the house, so be it. He'll never see a dime of it. I've got options. He doesn't. He's too predictable, too soft. I'll make him think he's winning, and then I'll bury him. The blood drained from my face, but I didn't move. My whole body was frozen in place, listening to her outline how she planned to manipulate me into a false sense of security just so she could strike later. Kimberly wasn't panicking. She was strategizing. The call ended, and I slipped out of the house as quietly as I'd entered. My mind was racing, my pulse pounding in my ears. She thought she had the upper hand, that I was just some naive fool she could outmaneuver. But what she didn't know was that I'd been recording her entire conversation. I drove to Matt's house again that night, barely able to contain my anger as I played the recording for him. His face went from disbelief to rage in seconds. "She's insane," he said, pacing the living room. "You've got to take her down, Rob. No more playing defense. Go on the offensive." He was right. Kimberly wasn't just toxic. She was dangerous. And if she wanted a war, I was more than ready to give her one. But this time, I wasn't going to let her see it coming. "First step," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I'm moving the house out of reach. She wants to sell it? Fine. But not without my permission." Matt raised an eyebrow. "How?" "Trust me," I said, already pulling up the number of a friend who specialized in property law. "By the time she realizes what's happening, she won't have a leg to stand on." As the pieces of my plan began falling into place, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. Kimberly had spent years playing me like a pawn, but now I was the one holding the board, and I was just getting started. The next day, I wasted no time. Before heading to work, I met with a property lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense guy named Greg, who came highly recommended by Matt. I laid everything out for him, from Kimberly's schemes to her intention to sell the house out from under me. Greg listened intently, his face impassive until I mentioned the offshore accounts and fake invoices. Then his eyebrows shot up. "Sounds like she's building quite the paper trail," he said, scribbling notes. "Good news for you. This gives us leverage. If she tries to liquidate assets without your consent, we can slap her with fraud charges." "Good," I said, my voice firm. "What do we need to do to lock the house down?" Greg leaned back in his chair, his pen tapping against the desk. "We file a notice of interest on the property. It won't stop her from trying to sell, but it'll scare off any buyer the second they see it. No one wants to touch a property tied up in a legal dispute." I nodded. "Do it. Whatever it takes." By noon, the paperwork was in motion. Kimberly might have thought she could manipulate me, but now the house was untouchable. Let her try to spin that into her little schemes. That evening, I arrived home to find Kimberly already in the living room, pacing again, her phone glued to her ear. This time, she was mid-rant when I walked in, so consumed with her conversation that she didn't even notice me standing in the doorway. "What do you mean you need more time?" she snapped, her tone venomous. "I told you this needs to happen now. He's getting suspicious, and if he catches on—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes darting toward me when she realized I was there. "Gotta go," she muttered, hanging up quickly and shoving the phone into her pocket. Her smile was forced, brittle. "Hey, honey, long day." I stared at her, my expression unreadable. "You could say that. How about you?" Her smile faltered. "Oh, just the usual. Work calls, emails, that sort of thing." "Uh-huh," I said, setting my bag down and walking into the kitchen. "Anything interesting happen?" She hesitated, following me but keeping her distance. "Not really." "Why?" I turned to face her, leaning casually against the counter. "No reason. Just wondering why I got a call from our real estate agent today." Her face froze. "Our agent?" "Yeah," I said, crossing my arms. "Funny thing. She said someone had inquired about selling the house. Apparently, they claimed to be me." Kimberly's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For a moment, I thought she might try to deny it, but then her expression shifted into that all-too-familiar mask of righteous indignation. "Robert, I was just exploring options. You've been so unpredictable lately, and I needed to make sure we were covered in case you did something drastic." I laughed, cold and sharp. "Something drastic? Like, I don't know, freezing accounts so you can't funnel more money to your boyfriend?" Her cheeks flushed, and she stepped closer, her tone switching to that syrupy sweetness she thought worked on me. "I know you're angry, but we can fix this. We're married, Robert, we've been through so much. Don't let one misunderstanding ruin everything. Misunderstanding, I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Kimberly, you've been lying, cheating, and scheming for years. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is who you are. She dropped the act instantly, her face twisting with rage. You think you're so clever, don't you? Freezing the accounts, repossessing the car, what, do you feel like a big man now? You're pathetic. You can't even handle your own marriage without running to lawyers and playing dirty. I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I pulled out a folder from my bag and tossed it onto the counter in front of her. Speaking of lawyers, you might want to take a look at that. Her eyes narrowed as she opened the folder, her face paling as she read through the documents inside. A notice of interest? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're tying up the house? I nodded. That's right. You can't sell it. You can't touch it. And if you even try, I'll make sure every shady little transaction you've made comes to light. Kimberly's hands trembled as she slammed the folder shut, her eyes blazing with fury. You bastard, she spat. You're really going to do this? You're going to destroy everything we built. I leaned in, my voice low and steady. No, Kim, you destroyed it. I'm just making sure you don't profit from the wreckage. Her mouth opened as if she was about to scream at me, but no words came out. Instead, she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I watched her go, my heart pounding, but not from fear or regret. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. Kimberly could play her games, spin her lies, and rage all she wanted. But I wasn't the same man she'd been manipulating. Not anymore. This wasn't just damage control. This was the beginning of the end. And I wasn't going to stop until she had nothing left to take. Kimberly didn't come home that night. I didn't bother calling her. I knew exactly where she was. Running to Ben, licking her wounds, trying to strategize her next move. The house was finally quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos she usually brought with her. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could think clearly. The next morning, I got another call from Greg. We've got more ammo, he said. I dug into those offshore accounts you mentioned. Turns out, one of them's tied to a shell company registered under Kimberly's name. Looks like she's been funneling money there for years. I sat back in my chair, the weight of his words sinking in. Years. She'd been planning this long before I ever suspected anything. This wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment betrayal. It was a carefully constructed plan to bleed me dry. Can we use it? I asked, already knowing the answer. Absolutely, Greg said. If this goes to court, we can argue fraud and asset concealment. She'll have a hard time walking away from this without serious consequences. Good, I said. Keep digging. I want everything. After hanging up, I decided it was time to escalate. Kimberly thought she was the queen of manipulation, but she didn't realize I'd been taking notes. If she wanted a game, I was going to play it better. That afternoon, I paid a visit to her office. Kimberly worked at a high-end real estate agency, the kind that catered to wealthy clients who valued appearances above all else. I walked in wearing my best suit, carrying a manila folder filled with every damning piece of evidence I had on her. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, smiled politely as I approached. Hi, I'm here to see Kimberly Daniels, I said, keeping my tone friendly but firm. The receptionist hesitated. She's not in the office right now. Can I leave her a message? That's all right, I said, flashing her a reassuring smile. I'll just leave this for her instead. I handed her the folder, making sure to keep my expression neutral. Inside were copies of the financial documents, the email from Ben, and a note that read, You've spent years lying to me. Let's see how your colleagues feel about who you really are. As I walked out, I could feel the tension in my shoulders easing. Kimberly's entire career was built on her reputation. If her coworkers found out about her schemes, or worse, her clients, it would all come crashing down. She'd made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. By the time I got home, I was greeted with a voicemail from an unknown number. I hit play, and Ben's voice filled the room. Robert, this is Ben Hamilton. We need to talk man to man. Kimberly's told me a lot about what's been going on, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let's meet up and clear the air. I laughed out loud. The audacity of this guy was almost impressive. Did he really think I'd sit down and have a civil conversation with him after everything he and Kimberly had done? Still, the call gave me an idea. I texted back, "Sure, let's meet. Tonight, 7 p.m., at the Foxridge bar." I had no intention of sitting down for a chat, but I wasn't going to waste the opportunity to get under his skin. Ben might have thought he had the upper hand, but I wasn't the same man Kimberly had painted me to be. I was done playing nice. When I walked into the Foxridge bar that evening, Ben was already there, sitting at a booth in the corner. He looked exactly like I remembered from Kimberly's old photos. Slicked back hair, smug grin, the kind of guy who thought he was untouchable. As I approached, he stood up, extending a hand like we were old friends. I didn't shake it. Instead, I slid into the booth opposite him and leaned back, my arms crossed. "All right, Ben," I said, my tone cold. "Let's clear the air." Ben's grin faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Look, I know this situation is complicated, but Kimberly and I, what we have, it's real. I don't want to cause any trouble for you. I just think it's time we all moved on." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "You think this is real?" I finally asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think Kimberly gives a damn about you? Let me guess. She's been telling you how miserable she is, how I don't appreciate her, how you're the only one who truly understands her." Ben blinked, his confidence wavering. "She's been honest with me." I leaned forward, my gaze piercing. "Then let me be honest with you. Kimberly doesn't care about you. She cares about what you can give her. Money, attention, a convenient escape from her problems. And when you're no longer useful, she'll toss you aside, just like she's been planning to do with me." Ben shifted uncomfortably, his smug facade cracking. "I don't believe you." "Of course you don't," I said, standing up. "But when she drains your bank account and runs off with someone else, don't say I didn't warn you." I left him sitting there, his expression a mix of confusion and doubt. He might not have believed me now, but I'd planted the seed. And knowing Kimberly, it wouldn't take long for her to prove me right. As I drove home, I couldn't help but smile. Kimberly thought she had everything under control, but her world was slowly unraveling, and I wasn't even close to being finished. The next morning, the first ripple from my moves hit. Kimberly stormed into the house like a hurricane, her heels clicking against the floor with an urgency that would have been comical if it weren't so telling. She dropped her bag onto the counter and glared at me, her face a mixture of fury and panic. "What the hell did you do, Robert?" she hissed, slamming her hands down. "You went to my office? Are you out of your mind?" I stayed seated at the dining table, sipping my coffee like nothing was wrong. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said calmly, not even bothering to look at her. "Don't play dumb with me," she snapped. "You left a folder full of lies and accusations at my office. Do you have any idea what that could have done to my reputation?" I finally met her gaze, letting a smirk tug at the corner of my lips. "Oh, you mean the truth? I figured it was time your colleagues knew the kind of person they were working with. Thought I was doing them a favor." Her face twisted with rage, and for a moment, I thought she might actually lunge at me. "You're pathetic," she spat. "This childish vendetta of yours isn't going to work. You think you can ruin me? You're nothing, Robert. Nothing." I leaned back in my chair, still perfectly composed. Funny, coming from someone whose entire life is built on lies. But go ahead, Kim. Keep telling yourself you're untouchable. See how long that lasts. She opened her mouth to fire back, but her phone buzzed on the counter, cutting her off. She snatched it up, her eyes darting to the screen. Her expression shifted instantly, less anger, more worry. Without another word, she turned on her heel and disappeared into the next room, closing the door behind her. I didn't follow, but I didn't need to. I already knew what she was dealing with. Greg had filed the legal paperwork tying up the house that morning, and I'd instructed him to have the notice delivered to Kimberly directly. If she was rattled now, it was only the beginning. By lunchtime, I had another surprise lined up. While Kimberly was busy scrambling to contain the mess I'd unleashed, I paid a visit to her favorite boutique downtown. It was one of those places where she'd blown thousands of dollars over the years, charging it all to the credit cards I didn't know existed. The owner, a stylish older woman named Lorraine, recognized me immediately when I walked in. "Robert, what a surprise," she said, her tone friendly but cautious. She clearly sensed this wasn't a casual visit. "What can I do for you?" "I just wanted to clarify something," I said, keeping my tone polite. "Kimberly's been telling me that all the charges on our account here were for work purposes. Is that true?" Lorraine's eyes widened slightly, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She hesitated, then leaned in, lowering her voice. "Robert, I really shouldn't get involved in this." "Lorraine," I said evenly, "if she's been lying to me, I have a right to know. I'm not here to cause trouble for you. I just need the truth." She sighed, clearly conflicted, before finally nodding. "She said it was for work, yes. But, well, she's been in here with a man a few times. Tall, dark hair. I assumed he was a client. But—" She trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. "Ben," I said, my jaw tightening. "Thank you for being honest." Lorraine looked genuinely regretful. "I'm sorry, Robert. I really am." I left the boutique feeling a mix of anger and vindication. Kimberly's web of lies was starting to collapse, and there was no way she could keep up the facade much longer. But I wasn't done yet. That evening, when Kimberly returned, she was visibly on edge. Her phone kept buzzing with calls and texts, and she ignored me completely as she paced the living room. Finally, she turned to me, her expression a mixture of anger and desperation. "I know what you're trying to do," she said, her voice sharp. "You think you're so clever, setting traps and stirring up drama. But you're not going to win, Robert. You're just proving how bitter and insecure you are." I stood up, meeting her gaze with a calm she clearly didn't expect. "This isn't about winning, Kimberly. This is about accountability. Something you've never had to deal with because you've spent your whole life manipulating people." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "Please, you're just trying to save face because you can't handle the fact that I've moved on." "Moved on?" I said, laughing bitterly. "Kim, you didn't move on. You cheated, lied, and bled me dry while pretending to be the victim. And now you're mad because I'm not rolling over and letting you get away with it." Her face twisted into a sneer, but before she could fire back, I held up my hand. "Save it. I've already taken steps to protect myself. The accounts are frozen. The house is tied up. And as for Ben, I wouldn't count on him sticking around once he realizes you're just using him." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I shot back. "You think I don't know you've been calling him, begging him to help you out of this mess? How long before he figures out that you're a sinking ship and jumps overboard?" For the first time, she didn't have a response. She just stood there, her chest rising and falling as she glared at me with pure hatred. It was the kind of look that would have intimidated me once, but now it only fueled my resolve. "Get comfortable, Kim," I said, walking past her toward the stairs, "because this is only the beginning." The next morning, Kimberly's game of denial turned into outright desperation. When I came downstairs, she was sitting at the dining table with her laptop open, papers scattered around her, and a cup of untouched coffee by her side. The look on her face was one I hadn't seen before, panic barely masked by a thin veneer of composure. "Robert," she began, her voice forced and saccharine, "we need to talk." I didn't even bother sitting down. "Talk about what, Kim? How you've been scheming for years? How you tried to sell the house behind my back? Or maybe how you're funneling money into offshore accounts?" Her jaw tightened, but she quickly plastered on a fragile smile. "No, I mean we need to talk about how to move forward. We're both adults, and this fighting isn't helping anyone. Let's work this out amicably." I let out a sharp laugh. "Amicably? You think I don't know you're only saying this because you're backed into a corner?" Her mask cracked, and the sharpness returned to her voice. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Robert. All I've done is try to build a better life for us. If I made some mistakes along the way, fine, but don't act like you're innocent. You've been emotionally checked out for years. And you decided the solution to that was draining our savings and sleeping with your ex?" I shot back, my voice ice cold. "That's rich even for you, Kim." Her composure finally snapped, and she slammed her hands on the table, standing up to face me. "You don't get it, do you? I had no choice. You've been so focused on work that I've been drowning in everything else. You want to paint me as the villain, but you're the one who abandoned me. I shook my head, marveling at her ability to twist reality. You're unbelievable. You had no choice? Kim, you chose every single step of this. You chose to cheat. You chose to lie. You chose to bleed me dry while pretending to be the perfect wife. And now that it's all falling apart, you're scrambling for someone to blame. Her face contorted with rage, but before she could retort, I held up a hand to stop her. Save it. I don't care anymore. I've already taken care of what matters. The house is off limits. The accounts are frozen. And every dirty little secret you've been hiding is documented and ready for court. So go ahead, keep lying, keep scheming. It won't change a damn thing. For the first time, Kimberly looked genuinely stunned. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. I didn't wait for her to recover. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, speechless for once. That evening, I got a call from Greg with another bombshell. Robert, I've been doing some digging on the shell company Kimberly's tied to. Turns out it's not just a personal stash. She's been using it to launder money for her business dealings. Fake clients, bogus sales. She's been funneling it all through this account. I sat back in my chair, the weight of his words settling over me. Kimberly wasn't just a manipulative liar. She was committing outright fraud. And if this came to light, her entire career, her reputation, everything she'd built would come crashing down. What do we do with this? I asked. We document it, for starters, Greg replied. If she tries to come after you in the divorce, this will blow her case out of the water. But if you want to escalate, he hesitated. We can turn this over to the authorities. For a moment, I felt a pang of hesitation. Turning her in would be the nuclear option, the kind of move that would ruin her completely. But then I thought about everything she'd done. The lies, the betrayal, the calculated destruction of our life together. She'd shown me no mercy, and she didn't deserve any in return. Do it? I said, my voice firm. Turn it over. When I got home, the house was quiet again. Kimberly was nowhere to be seen, and for a moment, I thought she might have left for good. But then I saw her suitcase by the stairs and heard her voice in the next room. I'm telling you, Ben, he's lost it, she said, her voice low but urgent. He's freezing everything, tying up the house, and now he's digging into my business. If he finds out about the other accounts, I'm screwed. You need to help me. I stepped into the doorway, my arms crossed. No need to worry about me finding out, Kim. I already have. She spun around, her face pale as a sheet. For once, she was speechless. I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit play on a recording of Greg's voice detailing her fraudulent activities. Here's the thing, I said, my tone calm but deadly. You've spent years underestimating me, thinking you could outsmart me. But now you're out of moves. The authorities will be getting a copy of this tomorrow, and I'll be filing for divorce first thing Monday. So pack your things, Kim. Your time here is over. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might beg. But instead, her face twisted into pure, unfiltered hatred. You'll regret this, Robert, she spat, her voice venomous. I'll make sure of it. I stepped closer, my eyes locking onto hers. No, Kim. The only regret I have is trusting you for as long as I did. But don't worry, you won't have to worry about me anymore. You've got Ben now. Let's see how far he's willing to carry your mess. She stood frozen, her fists clenched, as I turned and walked upstairs. For the first time in years, I felt like the weight of her lies was finally lifting off my shoulders. Kimberly's reign of manipulation was over, and the storm she'd created was now consuming her instead. Kimberly left the house the next day, not with the dramatic, door-slamming exit I half expected, but quietly, almost pitifully, carrying her suitcase to the car in silence. I didn't say a word as she passed me in the hallway. There was nothing left to say. She'd burned every bridge, and now she was running out of road. But even as I watched her pull out of the driveway, I knew this wasn't the end. Kimberly wasn't the type to go down without a fight. She'd find a way to retaliate, to claw back whatever she could. And sure enough, the first strike came less than 24 hours later. I got the call from Greg while I was at work. Robert, we've got a problem, he said, his tone unusually tense. Kimberly's lawyer just sent over a notice. She's filing a motion to have the accounts unfrozen, claiming financial hardship. And she's accusing you of emotional abuse as grounds for divorce. I nearly dropped the phone. Emotional abuse? I repeated, my voice rising. She's the one who's been lying, cheating, and stealing from me, and now she's trying to paint me as the villain? Greg sighed. It's a classic tactic. She's trying to get the upper hand by playing the victim. It's ugly, but it's not uncommon in cases like this. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process the sheer audacity of her move. What do we do? Don't worry, Greg said. We've got the recordings, the financial evidence, and now her fraudulent business dealings. This motion is just smoke and mirrors. But we'll need to prepare for a fight. A fight. That's exactly what Kimberly wanted. She wasn't just trying to salvage her life. She was trying to destroy mine in the process. That evening, as I sat alone in the now eerily quiet house, I decided it was time to take my counterattack to the next level. Kimberly wanted a fight, but she'd forgotten one key thing. I wasn't the man she'd been manipulating for all these years. I wasn't playing defense anymore. The first call I made was to Lorraine, the boutique owner. I'd been hesitant to involve her further, but she was more than willing to testify about Kimberly's reckless spending and her public appearances with Ben. She's made quite a spectacle of herself, Lorraine said, almost apologetically. If you need me to confirm that, I will. The second call was to Greg. If Kimberly wants to go down the emotional abuse route, we need to be ready, I told him. She's already spread lies about me to her friends and colleagues. I wouldn't be surprised if she tries to bring them into this. Noted, Greg said. I'll subpoena anyone she brings forward to testify. If they're lying for her, we'll find out. The third call was to Matt. He'd been my rock through this whole ordeal, and now I needed him more than ever. I'm going to war, Matt, I said. Kimberly's trying to drag me through the mud, and I'm not going to let her. You're damn right you're not, Matt said. What do you need? Everything, I said. Every scrap of evidence, every witness, every resource we can pull. If she wants a fight, she's going to get one. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers and strategic strikes. Kimberly's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim, but every claim she made was dismantled by the mountain of evidence I'd gathered. The recordings, the financial documents, Lorraine's testimony. It all painted a picture of a woman who had spent years scheming, lying, and taking advantage of everyone around her. The real turning point came when Greg presented the evidence of her fraudulent business dealings. Kimberly's face went pale as the court reviewed the shell company records, the offshore accounts, and the fake invoices. Her lawyer tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, but Greg shut that down with brutal efficiency. Circumstantial? He said, his voice sharp. Mrs. Daniels has been funneling money into these accounts for years, hiding it from both her husband and her business partners. This isn't circumstantial. This is fraud. Kimberly's composure finally cracked. She looked around the courtroom, her eyes wide and desperate, like a cornered animal. For the first time, she realized she wasn't in control anymore. When the dust settled, the court ruled in my favor. Kimberly's motion to unfreeze the accounts was denied, and the judge ordered her to repay a portion of the money she had siphoned from our savings. The house remained in my name, untouchable by her manipulative hands. And as for her business, the investigation into her fraudulent activities had already begun. It was only a matter of time before the rest of her world came crashing down. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The war wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. Kimberly had spent years trying to control me, to break me, to strip me of everything I had. But now the tables had turned, and for the first time in years I was free. Free to rebuild. Free to move forward. Free from her. Kimberly's downfall came faster than even I expected. The fraud investigation into her business dealings picked up steam when one of her former colleagues came forward, providing additional evidence of fake clients and shell accounts. Within weeks, the authorities had enough to formally charge her with tax evasion and financial fraud. Her face, once plastered on high-end real estate billboards, became a public scandal, tarnished beyond repair. I wasn't there to see her arrest, but Matt sent me a link to the news article. Prominent realtor Kimberly Daniels indicted in major fraud case. The headline was enough. She'd spent years building her image as a successful, glamorous professional, and now it was all unraveling in the most public way possible. Meanwhile, Ben's loyalty crumbled just as I predicted. He cut ties with her the moment the legal fallout began, likely realizing that being attached to her would drag him down too. Kimberly was left completely alone, her once perfect facade shattered. As for me, I finalized the divorce quietly and efficiently. The settlement was simple, given the overwhelming evidence against her. She walked away with nothing, no house, no savings, no car. Just the mess she'd made of her life. After the divorce, I sold the house and moved into a smaller place. A fresh start I desperately needed. I didn't feel victorious or smug, just relieved. The war was over, and I could finally put the pieces of my life back together without her manipulations weighing me down. What I learned from all of this is simple. Never ignore the red flags, no matter how small they seem. Kimberly didn't become a master manipulator overnight. She tested boundaries, pushed limits, and relied on my willingness to forgive and overlook her flaws. By the time I realized the full scope of her betrayal, I was neck-deep in a life I didn't recognize.